What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we have our first episode in our new Underdog Draft Strategy Series this summer. If you want to see all of the math behind this project, I went over all of that last week. I'll link that in the description box down below. But today we're going to take a deep dive into one strategy the model found, along with a discussion as to why it works, my tips for implementing it best, and then a real team that I drafted using this strategy. So sit back, hit the like button, and let's hop into this. So this week we're going over the robust RB strategy. This one is fairly easy to remember. I always like strategies that you can remember without having to write them down in Google Notes or something like that when you're implementing them. This one, if you just think about it a little bit, you'll be able to remember it. And it's one of my favorite strategies because it's actually pretty common to be able to start off with this build because people love wide receivers. People love their quarterbacks. And so sometimes you're in drafts where a running back becomes a really, really good value in the first few rounds. So to start off, we're going to take 4 running backs in the first 4 rounds. Every single one of those rounds will be a running back. That is going to seem like too many, but it is the only 4 running backs we're going to take for the entire draft. And there will absolutely be leagues where this is optimal. We don't want to start a draft being like, I'm doing this, because there will be some times where you get to running back in the early rounds and there really is no one. And that's totally fine. We abandon this strategy and we don't use it. But like I said, people love wide receivers and people are really taking quarterbacks early as well. And then of course, you've got your Kelsey, you got your Andrews at tight end. And so there are drafts where running backs become a really, really good value. So if that happens, we want to have an optimal strategy ready to implement so that we can take advantage. So we're starting off with those 4 running backs. Then over the next 5 rounds, we're going to alternate through wide receiver and quarterback. We'll go over in a few minutes how it's not overly important which specific round you take wide receiver versus quarterback. Ideally, over these next 5, you're just getting 3 wide receivers, 2 quarterbacks. If you are, in round 5 and round 6 and you love the quarterback value in both of those rounds, go quarterback, 3 straight wide receivers. But just in the next 5 rounds, wide receiver, quarterback, wide receiver, quarterback, wide receiver. Just get 3 wide receivers and 2 quarterbacks. And we're going to see actually in my build that I'm going to show you guys in a few minutes that it's not always possible. It is not always possible to follow these builds 100% perfectly. You're going to have to make some slight deviations. It's okay. Never reach to make these builds possible. So again, we took 4 running backs to start. In the next 5 rounds, we took 2 quarterbacks and 3 wide receivers. We do not have a tight end yet. Over the final 9 rounds, all the double-digit rounds, we're taking no quarterbacks, no running backs, 6 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends, leaving us with a 2 quarterback, 4 running back, 9 wide receiver, 3 tight end build. So I'll let you digest that for a moment, but the general idea is that we are hammering quarterback in the early rounds. We're hoping, if this build is going to hit, that we're hitting on at least 3 of these, right? If we draft 3 busted running backs in the first 4 rounds, this is not going to work. So we're looking for upside. We're looking for players that we feel really, really good about for those running backs in the first 4 rounds. And if we hit, we don't need any for the rest of the draft. We are attacking wide receiver and quarterback in the middle rounds. And then we are finishing off wide receiver in the later rounds while also taking 3 tight ends late. This strategy works out optimally from a late first round pick. So if we look at the success it's had from all the different picks throughout the draft, the later rounds do better, which makes a little bit of sense. We typically see really, really high-end running backs kind of pushed into that late first round, early second round. And so when you have that turn pick, you oftentimes do get to take 2 really, really good running backs that could end up finishing, first and second at the position. Not as likely, if you have an early first round pick and you get McCaffrey, we're leaning a little bit more towards hero RB builds there, because when you get to the back half of the second round, it's less likely one of those league winning running backs falls to that spot. Still possible, but again, it works out a little bit better given the math, given the simulations, with a like mid to late, more late first round pick. So how does it work? As I said before, we're going to be in some drafts where people fall in love with the wide receiver position. And this season, they're also falling in love with quarterback in the back half of the second round as well. So that is sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes going to push back elite running backs, offering you a chance to load up on 4 studs. Now, to take advantage of like the edge you've created, right? Because you've created an edge for yourself taking 4 running backs in the first 4 rounds, we kind of have to assume that these running backs work out. Like if you draft bust, you're not going to win anyway. So there's no point in saying, okay, I've only drafted 4. What if 2 of them get injured? I should take more running backs in the later rounds. Well, if 2 of them get injured, you're probably going to get smoked, right? Like you're not going to win anyways. There's going to be other teams that just had a better start to you. Their, running backs they drafted early didn't get hurt, and then they also drafted way better wide receivers. Like they're just gonna have a better team than you. So you have to just assume that at least 3 of these running backs work out, and so you shouldn't be taking them in the later rounds. You also have to realize that, well, you're going to be weak at wide receiver. The first round you're allowed to take a running back in this build effectively is the 5th. And so that hurts, right? That's 4 rounds of many other teams getting 1, 2, sometimes 3 wide receivers. They're going to destroy you at wide receiver. It's also a position that you have to start 3 of every single week. You can start up to 4 with the flex. So you want to be making up for not drafting them early by drafting a lot of them. And you definitely need to do so in the middle rounds. You can't wait for all of them in the later rounds because let's be honest, there's not going to be like, 9 breakout wide receivers that you hit on in the final rounds. You're going to have plenty of misses in the double-digit rounds as we work our way into rounds 14, 15, 16. You're going to like a lot of the wide receivers there, but many of them are not going to work out. And so you still do need really solid wide receiver talent in the middle rounds just to give yourself access to some sort of ceiling position. I also think that quarterback in the middle rounds is really important here. Remember that we took 4 running backs in the first 4 rounds. And so it is likely that many weeks our flex position is being used on a running back at a way higher rate than normal. Normal teams typically have wide receiver used in the flex at a much higher rate than running back and a much, much higher rate than tight end. And so our build is going to use running back a little bit more in that flex spot, meaning that it can take a little bit of that load off of wide receiver, but that helps wide receiver. That helps tight end not ever needing to fill the flex. It doesn't help quarterback. And so by taking 2 of them in the middle rounds, you're maintaining that upside in your roster, and you're not just saying, well, I'm going to be weak here because you're also possibly weak at wide receiver and you haven't taken a high-end tight end. And so you don't want to be like, I'm strong at running back, but I stink everywhere else. You want to make sure that you're still strong at every position. So you're strong at running back. You've got 2 rock solid quarterbacks. You have enough wide receivers and you've taken them in the middle round. So as a unit, they can get it done with 3 positional spots each week. And then you have the 3 tight ends late that lets you take 3 shots at a breakout. And at the very least, if none of them are going to break out, it gives you 3 chances each week to hit on a random tight end touchdown. Like many tight ends are not going to break out in the later rounds. It is very, 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 very difficult to hit on a late round breakout tight end, but you could hit on maybe 2 or 3 tight ends that get to 5, 6, maybe 7 touchdowns. Well, now many weeks you are still starting a tight end that scored a touchdown, and as a unit, the 3 of them can make up decent production. And that's really where the first tip I have with the strategy comes in. I would suggest targeting athleticism and touchdowns with those late round tight ends. Like I said, very difficult to hit on a true breakout at the tight end position in the later rounds. And sometimes it's impossible because we have years where no one broke out, right? There were just 0 successes late. But historically, breakouts either come from tight ends randomly catching like 10 or 12 touchdowns on an offense that really produces well in that year, or they're like an athletic freak and they just run into some weeks where teams really lean on them because they have maybe an edge over the linebackers that week, but they're just able to win with their athleticism. And so even though they're not on an offense that finishes like top 7 in scoring, let's say, they just have some weeks where they win with athleticism, and that's why they produce really highly. So there's no need to go out and draft, tight ends on teams that we know are going to be like bottom 5 in scoring, really unathletic tight ends that we just know are not going to have true breakouts. Try and get tight ends on offenses that could just get lucky with touchdowns because they could hit, 10 touchdowns and really have a dominant season. Think Robert Tonyan back a few years ago. Or just, younger, maybe not as many rookies, but younger tight ends that are very, very athletic that could just break out with their athleticism. My second tip is to actually stack your late round tight end with one of the quarterbacks you drafted. Like I said, one of the outs with a late round tight end is touchdowns. Did they get lucky with touchdowns? And that'll typically happen when an offense really, overproduces what we were expecting. Well, if that happens, and many of these touchdowns are coming in the receiving game, would you not want to stack their quarterback? Like if you got their tight end right, the quarterback probably also had a really good season, probably also had a lot of different spiked weeks. Well, that's what we want to be taking advantage of. So remember, the quarterbacks you drafted in the middle rounds, just try and in the later rounds, match those quarterbacks with their tight ends. Then my final tip before we take a look at my team is to please never reach to make a strategy work. You can reach a few spots, but if every one of your pick, you're saying, have to go with wide receiver here, have to go with quarterback here, and you're reaching every single time ahead of ADP, it's not going to work out very well. These strategies are a guideline to show you what's optimal, but if the draft is pushing you in a slightly different direction, it's more than okay to deviate. And I think that's where we bring my team in here. You can see right off the bat, I made deviations. I did not go with this exact build because the value just wasn't there. And I wasn't going to force picks just to fit exactly into what the build says. I mean, you can see right at the beginning, I didn't even start off with 4 running backs. And that's like the core of this build. And optimally, I would have. Like, we really are trying to start off with 4 running backs, but I thought I got great values on Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry. I felt really, really good about those 3 running backs. But with my 4th pick, I didn't love my options. Basically, I would have had to take Najee Harris, and it just didn't sit super well with me. I'm not in love with him this season, and I really wanted to really, really like that 4th running back pick, and I didn't. So I opted to just take the value with Deebo Samuel. He had fallen a few spots. We know we're going to need wide receiver production with this build. And so I just thought, forego that 4th running back, take Deebo Samuel. You'll also see, if you look at the middle rounds, I took Kyle Pitts in round 6 instead of taking a quarterback. And I actually think that decision was somewhat of a mistake. Not in the sense that I should have taken a quarterback, because I looked back at the draft board and no one was really available. That was kind of a range, in round 6 where Trevor Lawrence had gone in round 5. You really do see a break off after those top 8 quarterbacks. Deshaun Watson was the next quarterback, but he didn't go until the 7th round. And so I really would have been reaching to take Deshaun Watson, more than a round ahead of ADP at that point. And it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. I looked at the wide receivers and I probably should have gone with that direction, but I opted to take Pitts. I wanted some of that upside. I wanted, the chance that if Kyle Pitts really does work out this season, that he is a, top 2, maybe even tight end, that he's matching the production of Mark Andrews, but I got him, 3 rounds later than Mark Andrews. But looking back, I think this build works out better. I could have drafted Chris Godwin, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett with that pick. I personally, again, think Godwin would have been the best choice there. He's the one I like the most of those wide receivers. And then you look back, I could have done, instead of doing Pitts and Wan'Dale Robinson, which is what I ended up doing, I could have gone with Godwin and then someone like maybe Dawson Knox, maybe Trey McBride in the later rounds. Again, you're not going to be super strong at wide receiver in this build. And so I think it was a little bit more important for me to grab one more rock solid wide receiver. And if I know that I'm probably going to be drafting 3 tight ends, there's no real need to draft one in the middle rounds, right? If you're drafting 3 tight ends, you draft one in the middle rounds, assuming they're going to work out, right? But if Pitts hits his ceiling, Pitts really works out for me, has a breakout, finishes, let's just say top 3 at the tight end position. Well, now I drafted Pat Freiermuth, I drafted Cole Kmet. How much am I really using any of their scores this season? They'll definitely cycle in, but I won't be using them that much. And so at least one, maybe both of those picks won't be that optimal. I should have gone with, a wide receiver. I should have maybe, given that I didn't take a running back in the 4th round, maybe another running back there. But I think the point is taking Pitts there kind of throws this build a little bit off. And so I think I should have taken a wide receiver. Also, I didn't stack any of my tight ends with the quarterback. Again, that's not mandatory in the build. Those are just suggestions that I made. Not, hyper important to do in every single draft. But I also wanted to show this because sometimes it's not even possible, right? If I want to pair a quarterback with Cousins, it has to be Hawkinson. Well, I couldn't have done that. I didn't even have, Hawkinson by the time I took Cousins. This is a build that wants late round tight ends. Hawkinson obviously does not go in the later rounds. And then I'm not really a huge fan of the Cowboys tight ends. I didn't really want to do that. I already have a stack with Dak Prescott that has Brandon Cooks, has Deuce Vaughn, and so it wasn't entirely necessary to spend, my last pick on one of the Cowboys tight ends. And so again, those are suggestions. I think over time they are optimal decisions if you can implement them, but it wasn't really possible for me to do so in this draft. But overall, I still really like how this team worked out, and I really do love this strategy. And I like that I was able to present a team where things didn't go right. I didn't get that great value with my 4th running back. I didn't see amazing value at quarterback in the 6th round. I had to push off quarterback a little bit later than I wanted to. But those things are going to happen to you. So please don't go into a draft knowing you're going to use this strategy, because it's an optimal strategy. It works out very, very well over time. But if you're forcing it and you're not taking great picks, it's not going to work out. But again, I liked how the build turned out, even though I didn't fully follow this. Jonathan Taylor, Saquon, Henry, they all have the overall running back 1 in their range of outcomes. Both my quarterbacks, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, they have very high touchdown ceilings, and I was able to stack them with wide receivers. And I feel good enough about the value I got at wide receiver, because if you look at the screen now, a lot of the wide receivers I took was, a round, sometimes 2 rounds, behind ADP. And they were still wide receivers I really liked. They weren't some scrub wide receivers that I didn't care about. I like the wide receivers I got. And I think the 9 of them can get the job done at wide receiver. And then I feel like just overall with the build, I was able to get close enough to what's optimal, close enough to really good stacks without having to reach really far for any of it. I let the draft come to me, implemented the strategy I thought would work out well, and I think the team worked out really nicely. So if you have any questions about this build and how to use it, please ask away in the comment section below or in our free Discord. Link to that is the description box down below. And if you want to see all the other strategies that the model found as being optimal, then we've got a really nice deal going on with Underdog right now you'll want to take advantage of. If you sign up for your first Underdog account today using promo code FFA, they will not only match your first deposit up to $100. So let's say you deposit $75, they'll turn it into $150, but you'll gain access to my custom Underdog rankings, all the strategy articles where I deep dive into strategies like this, along with my Underdog optimal strategy app. So you can find optimal strategies of your own and even use the app while drafting, all for free. So make sure you're signed up and take advantage of this deal. It's the best one we're going to have all summer, and you'll be able to draft with us in all the upcoming live streams on Tuesday nights. So I'll be back tomorrow for another episode of Mock Draft Monday. Tuesday, live 6:30 Eastern to draft with all of you and answer any questions you have. And then Wednesday to talk about tight end strategy. That, my friends, is in this one. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.